Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. This episode is in partnership with Tracksuit, a beautiful, affordable and always-on brand tracking tool that helps marketers and agencies answer the age-old question, is my strategy working? It's not enough to talk about great creative or reach. Your CFO wants proof that your campaigns are driving growth with the segments who actually matter. Tracksuit makes it all possible without the six-figure price tag. In just 30 days, you'll have a live dashboard tracking your brand health over time, benchmarking you against competitors, and surfacing boardroom-ready insights. We at Cello use Tracksuit. Many of our guests on the podcast have used Tracksuit. It's a really, really great tool. If you can't prove your brand campaigns have worked, you risk losing your budget. No! And if you can, you unlock growth. Check them out at gotracksuit.com. Today, my guest is Sudeep Gohil, former partner in charge of brand and marketing at KPMG Australia. Partner in charge really makes me feel like an adult has entered the chat. He's now partner at Tenet Advisory and Investments, which is a 100-person VC strategy M&A tech firm. I met Sudeep years ago through another KPMG partner who thought we'd have a lot in common, and that we do. Sudeep's one of the most chilled, laid-back, effortless, yet highly achieving, sharp, strategic minds I've come across. I know that you'll love this chat today. Before all of this professional services stuff, Sudeep was an agency guy with a wealth of strategy and executive roles. In my opinion, your most well-known role was founding partner and subsequently CEO at Droga5 in its heyday. He's worked in India, LA, and now based in Sydney. Sudeep, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lindsay. Thanks very much for having me. Nice to be here.
So you've operated at a very senior level for a long time. Tell me something about you that people wouldn't expect from someone with such a successful professional background.
Something people probably wouldn't expect is the fact that I might look like I'm cool, calm, and collected, but more often than not, I'm suffering massively from imposter syndrome, particularly when I'm in a big room talking to big people about things. I think I have an ability to deliver the conversation with confidence, but yeah, sometimes wondering how the hell I ended up there.
But that's really interesting because you've obviously kicked a bunch of goals in your career. How do you get around that? Do you give yourself a pep talk, or is it just like your own brand now is quite understated?
Not so much a pep talk. I think it's a little bit about just really kind of trying to do your homework before you walk in somewhere, so you kind of know where the plastic is, firstly. But also, secondly, just trying to have a point of view on the world that is a little bit more unique and a little bit more mine.
Do you see yourself as a marketer, a strategist, a leader above all else, and which one and why?
First and foremost, I'm a strategy person, just because I love kind of solving problems. I love having conversations about things that I don't know anything about, or things that I might know a little bit about, that I can draw some threads together and try and solve a problem. So yeah, I'm a strategist first and foremost. That then obviously kind of plays into how I do the different things that I do. So, you know, when I'm working on a creative project, I start with the kind of strategic angle first. When I've led companies, sold companies, done whatever, I've always kind of been thinking about, well, how are we going to do this, and why are we going to do this, and what's going to be the most compelling way forward? So yeah, definitely a strategist first.
And when you think about your immediate team or teams that have worked well in the past, who do you complement yourself with? Who are your sort of allies?
I get on really well when I'm working closely with people that have a really deep financial background, not just in business, but even in kind of professional services. Like, I really enjoyed and got a lot out of people that were experts in that particular area. I mean, to the extent that I actually went and did some postgraduate study in that particular space. I did a finance and accounting course, finance and accounting for business professionals or something like that at Wharton, which is really interesting because you realize how much, or I at least realized how much of every single conversation has got a financial angle to it. Not an expert by any stretch, but it gives you a very different perspective, particularly when you start talking about creativity and strategy. So I've always made sure, you know, when we're running the agency world or any of the other bits and pieces that I've been involved with, that the finance people are front and center.
When you think about the best leaders you've worked with, what do you think they did differently from the rest?
I think, and it's such a basic thing to say, but I think they were incredibly authentic and true to themselves and were more about other people than themselves. So if I think back to working with Dan Wyden or John Hegarty and even David Nobby, all of them were more interested in the person that was sitting in front of them than themselves. And so the big thing that I've kind of picked up that, whenever I'm talking to someone in my team or a client or something like that, like the most important person, topical conversation, distraction is the thing that they are interested in and care about the most.
So simple and so meaningful. I think we've all been there when someone's distracted and you just feel you're not the most important person in that moment. You launched Droga5 in the Australian market and it grew rapidly. I read somewhere over 3 years you hired, I can't remember now, a lot of people. Tell me a bit about that experience, what it taught you and what was it like being on the inside?
Look, it was an incredible experience. There was the three of us when we started that agency and my dog, who subsequently passed away. There were three people and we had clients that we could not go anywhere near because our previous agencies, we'd had non-competes and stuff like that. So our approach was basically that we needed to go and talk to their competitors. So, we went with a spring in our step, but kind of not really a huge, not a lot of process and or this is how you do it at Droga5 or any of that stuff. But we basically just went and spoke to the competitors of the businesses that we were working with previously. And the conversations we had and the work that we could potentially do started to gain a bit of interest. And I think that the first big client we won was CUB. We won the VB account. And, it was literally, at that stage, there might have been 5 people, not 3 people, but for only 5 people. And at the time, VB was the biggest beer brand in the country. And it was, it was pretty wild. And then from there, it was, VB and then other CUB brands that we ended up picking up. We worked with Virgin for a little while, and then we ended up with Qantas, Woolworths, et cetera, et cetera. And so it grew incredibly quickly, which was an amazing experience. And then, as is often with the things, not often, but as sometimes happens, things that burn so brightly kind of burn themselves out a little bit. And I think, the business was sold in part. There was some kind of changes we had made kind of semi-strategically, or actually strategic changes in terms of the types of clients that we had and type of work that we wanted to do, specifically the amount of retail work that we were doing for Woolworths. And then, losing those bits whilst it was probably the right thing to do means you end up in a bit of a spiral where revenue becomes a really big issue, or rather lack of revenue became a really big issue for us. As much as it was hard growing that business, massive learning for me was it's even harder to manage a business in decline, right? Like it takes a long time for something to grow, or rather, for you to kind of end up with a sense of kind of financial security around what you're doing from a growth perspective. But as soon as things start going in the other direction, it's really, really, really hard. Because at that stage, you're dealing not just with business, you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with the industry, the media, and you're dealing with people as well. And so every decision that you make isn't just a decision that involves you, but it involves a whole bunch of other people. And that was really tough.
Do you think you could do the same thing again in terms of, launch an agency, scale it super fast today, or was it a moment in time?
You can definitely do it. I mean, there are obviously agencies that have done really, really well and grown really quickly. I think where it's harder now than it was probably then was we still benefited from big budgets and clients willing to pay retainers to have people on staff and all that kind of stuff. I think that what makes it harder now is the nature of commercial contracts, the nature of work that people are doing in the market, and just the amount of money that there is to go around to do any of those things or all of those things.
So after a really successful stint in various agencies in various cities, you moved over to KPMG. Tell me a bit about what took you there. What was it that you were wanting to achieve when you first started?
Well, so I'd by that stage, I'd worked, I'd done BB8, Wyden, and Droga5. And at the end of that whole time period, I basically decided I would never wanted to work in an agency ever again. I was going to do something totally different. I did end up doing a little bit of extra agency stuff in between, more on kind of contractual basis. The last of which was working for a big multinational in Publicis, which is an amazing organization. And I was in India. And whilst I loved my experience of living in India with my family and doing all that stuff, I just found, I thought that I would have a better handle of what the work culture was like, and was not something that really kind of fit with me. So we decided we wanted to come back to Australia, and there was a bunch of different things I was looking at, and a few of them were kind of more agency focused type opportunities. And I just decided, well, you know what, hang on, there seems to be a lot of conversation around this group of businesses called the Big Four, spending a lot of money looking at the world of advertising. So I just reached out to all of them. So I reached out to PwC, where Russell Howcroft and Justin Paps were leading the CMO advisory, had very good conversations with those guys, spoke to people at Deloitte and EY, and then at KPMG as well. And at KPMG, I had, I'd totally forgotten, but I had an old friend, Paul Howes, who was running a team, or had set up a team within KPMG called Customer Brand and Marketing Advisory. And when I spoke to Paul, when I was living in India at the time, I spoke to Paul and I said, hey, thinking about coming back to Australia, wanting to know if you'd be interested in having a conversation with me. In true Paul Howes style, he goes, are you talking to anyone else about, anyone else in the Big Four? I said, yeah, I am actually. And he goes, well, tell those guys that you're not interested in talking to them anymore. I'll give you a job. It was an interesting conversation with him because I said, okay, that sounds pretty cool. That's great. I mean, what exactly will I be doing? And he goes, you're a smart guy. I'm a smart guy. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. But let's,
love that.
You should join KPMG.
Which says a lot about the value that you bring in problem solving, right? Like, we'll just put you to use on the problems that we have.
Yes. It also probably talks a little bit to my initial naivety of what exactly it means to work as a consultant in a professional services firm, because, you live and die by the sword in this particular environment and in that particular environment as well. So I basically just bits and pieces happened in between, and then I ended up joining. But the thing that was the motivating factor for me really was, look, I knew what was going on in agency land. I love making work and doing work in that space, and I love the power of creativity and everything else. But I also thought, you know what, I'll do this. If I went and joined an agency, any of them, even the best ones, I'll do it for 5 years and I'll be like, I'm bored. I want to do something different now. And I thought the idea of joining a consulting practice meant that, hey, now I'd be learning something brand new and it'd be something very different for me. So for me, it was as much a case of starting from scratch and learning how to do something different, but applying the skills that I had learned in other industries to apply to that.
You've said before that the brand of the Big Four is arguably stronger than any of the individual firms' brand. And if that one firm does something untoward, everyone cops it. How did you think about developing KPMG's brand specifically? How did you define it? And how did you sort of think about your audience separate to the others?
That's a good question. It's interesting. When I joined KPMG, I actually had two roles, right? And I had a consulting role, so I had a kind of client-facing set of responsibilities. And then the other role was kind of as the head of brand, kind of looking inwards and how do we tell that story externally. The organization does a lot of research on, how they sit in market and the competitive space and all the rest of it. And you're right, that the brand of the Big Four is bigger than the individual brands, potentially, depending on the day of the week. What happened was that of the Big Four, KPMG was the one that had the least clearly defined position in market. So they were famous for being blue. They were famous for being quite conservative, and probably not a hell of a lot else beyond that, which the first thing that I did was start to really understand the people, the work that we did, the clients that we had, and all that kind of stuff. And you realize that actually the external perceptions of this business are not true. And there needed to be something, then we need to do some activity to try and fix that perception about the business. And the other thing that came up time and time again was that KPMG are the good guys in the professional services world, and not good guys as in, or nice guys actually, but the nice guys and girls of the professional services industry. And not in a particularly positive way, like a little bit like, they're the kind of vanilla guys that don't really have a strong opinion on anything. They'll just kind of fit in with whatever the client wants them to do, et cetera, et cetera. And once again, that I didn't find that to be true either. Like, we had really strong opinions on things and really passionate people doing really interesting work. And so therefore, what came out of it was, okay, so how do we articulate what our point of view is on the world, and how do we make sure that we tell that story externally?
Just high level, what process did you go through?
Well, it was interesting. We were going to run a creative pitch. So I kind of did a lot of the strategy work, and then we were going to run a creative pitch. We ended up basically I had some conversations with some of the different agencies that we were talking to. We ended up not going through the full pitch process because it just felt like a special group who were the agency that we ended up hiring to work with us. It just got what we were trying to do better than some of the other conversations that we were having. And so we then basically worked collaboratively in terms of, here's all the information that we have, here is the brief, et cetera, et cetera. let's figure out a way that we can actually tell this story more effectively. And then the agency then started to spend time with people across the business as well. And we developed a campaign called How You Grow Matters. So basically the premise was, look, in a world where growth is kind of not inevitable, but everyone's kind of chasing growth. At KPMG, we have a point of view that there's good growth and bad growth. And we as a business will help you figure out how you can grow your business in a positive, good way effectively. And that was what it was about.
From our conversations that we've had previously, I know your time at KPMG, you pivoted your team to be more commercial, educating the CEO and CFO on media buyers and brand value and, centralized budget. What is your secret to translating marketing metrics or principles or language into boardroom language that they're on board with?
I think the first thing is that you actually have to make the effort to make that leap or have that conversation. It's very easy for marketing people not to learn any of that stuff and to basically just be good at presenting an idea, as we talked about before, to basically have a great conversation with someone and try and convince them that this is the right thing to do and get them to reluctantly sometimes, or even sometimes enthusiastically, kind of walk towards your point of view on things. The thing I realized at KPMG was, it's a very, very big business and there's a lot of layers and there's a lot of kind of structure on the inside of it. And the only way to get things through an organization like that, which is very, very rigorous about every decision that it makes, is to make sure that you are having the right conversations with the right people at the right time. And my feeling was we need to teach the people that will help us make these decisions about the world that we're kind of asking them to step into. So what does it mean when we talk about our brand? It's not just the logo, it's these other things. What does it mean when we talk about a return on investment on a campaign? How are we going to measure it? And, a place like KPMG measures everything, but this was a whole part of the vernacular that was not massively well measured. And so what we then started to do was find those right data points and then link them together so that we were actually having a commercial conversation. So if I turned around and I said, hey, we'd like to spend X dollars on this, we believe that it will generate Y in pipeline. And if we convert 20% of it, you can start to see very easily what that looks like from a value perspective for the business.
Why do you think more senior marketers don't either have a seat at the boardroom table or potentially don't push upwards to engage, say, with the CFO?
I've been doing a bit of thinking about this recently, actually. I mean, I think one of the challenges, it's probably a kind of reasonably current challenge, is if you think about it, if you just swim in the marketing lane and you smash absolutely everything, every single part of your job, and when you talk about marketing, you think, if I'm thinking more specifically around kind of the communication side of it and the advertising side of it, even if you do the best job possible, you're only going to see a few percentage points of increase in the bottom line of the business, probably, right? Like marketing is becoming so hard in its traditional form to genuinely help scale the business. There are less and less, I think, kind of marketing-led organizations. There have been a few over the years, mainly because of the way the market has developed nowadays. And so therefore, I think if you only talk about marketing and creativity and some of these types of topics, well, yes, there'll be lots of people that will go, you're the expert on that because no one else really understands it. But you're also kind of talking about a very narrow lane that you're kind of swimming in. And so that is probably one of the challenges because a lot of marketing people feel more comfortable in those areas. But then equally, it's hard to step out of it and have a more commercial conversation if that's not your remit, if that's not what is expected of you. So I think that's a big part of the challenge as well.
Another thing that I know at your time at KPMG you achieved is that you moved your team to sort of 12 or 18-month thematic cycles to stop ad hoc requests and to keep consistency around your messaging and market, etc. How did you enforce that discipline across the business? Did teams adapt well to it? Tell me a bit about your process there.
Okay, I just have to qualify that by saying this is what we were trying to do. So I don't
Best
think
laid plans, etc.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think we ever stopped ad hoc requests. It's just, not possible to do. However, what we were able to do, and once again, this sounds super basic, was we started off by going, hey, we do these things regularly, year in, year out. Some professional services firms have centralized marketing budgets. Our marketing budget was dispersed across the organization. So through consulting and tax and audit and all the rest of it. and we had a brand budget as well. So what we needed to try and do was stitch together all of these different pools of money, which basically meant stitch together the conversations with all of the different budget owners to basically go, hey, this is the best thing for us to do as a business. If we had all the control and it was a top-down approach to doing things, it would be one conversation. But since it was bottom-up, it was very different. So what we then started to do was go, okay, these are our regular activities. These are times of the year that we're not going to be in market. These are things that we always do, whether they've got money associated with them or not associated. And we started to kind of build it up from the bottom up and go, look, by the time you look at the year, you then realize there's actually, A, there's not that much time that we can actually do marketing activities. And then two, if we are going to do marketing activities, it would be good if the organization was all pointed in the right direction. So if we're going to be talking about AI and technology, for example, let's make sure that we're doing all of that stuff in this block here. Once again, it's so basic, but the process of kind of stepping it out like that and the process of having that level of conversation was really valuable, because then what people started to go, oh, AI, we'll talk about that at this time period. And what we started to find was people across the business started to go, well, this is when we should be talking about that for maximum impact, because we'll be doing outdoor advertising. So if I've got a piece of thought leadership on that same topic, let's do it at that time period. It's really not rocket science. It's just in an organization that is as large and complicated and layered as something like KPMG, it's much harder to do than in other organizations, I think.
Many of the listeners manage global brands locally. You've told me before that you've often experienced a breakdown where global teams mandate campaigns that won't land locally. I've also personally had a good conversation with the CMO at one of the other big fours, who believes that global campaigns can land locally. It might not be 100%, but it's worth it more so than the cost of localizing content. How do you think about it, and how do you push back if you don't agree?
It's a good question. Look, I think at the end of the day, KPMG is a global brand, but it's not a global business. So what that means is each country owns its own business and its own brand, because advertising in particular is such a small part of what they do from a marketing perspective. Often there was not a lot of kind of usable assets that would come from global. So our point of view was always, look, we're one brand. The global line for KPMG is make the difference. So we moved away from How You Grow Matters, which was our local campaign, and we shifted towards the idea of make the difference. And what we would always say and how we would always work is like, does it help working with our global team to go, guys, let's design this campaign so that it is intended to be a global campaign with toolkits and pieces that we can use or not use. Let's not have a talking head on it so that we can then, put an Australian voiceover over it, et cetera, et cetera. Because those types of campaigns operated at such a high level, it wasn't as much about the messaging, it was more about the execution, which was what we needed to kind of work on with them. But at the end of the day, I left before that big global campaign rolled out in Australia, so hopefully it worked out well.
Tell me a bit about a hunch you've had in your career, one perhaps nobody else saw, and whether it paid off.
I've actually had this debate quite a while, which is I think that marketing is increasingly becoming a more financial pursuit than a creative pursuit. And I'm sure that if there are creative people listening to this, they would massively disagree with me. But I just think that's my hypothesis. And if I look back, I think the jury's still out as to whether or not I'm right or wrong about that. But it feels like it is heading in that direction. Hence my desire to try and join together the financial world and the creative world wherever possible. Because I think the other thing is that, as everything has become more and more measurable and as we can buy more and more things to market, unfortunately, it feels like things have got less effective, particularly when you start thinking about digital advertising. And at the risk of sounding like an old-timey person, our worlds were much simpler even 5-10 years ago, right? Where if you wanted to reach a group of people, there was maybe 3 different ways that you think would work, and one of them probably would. Now there are so many routes to reaching consumers. Attention spans are so brutally short that the things that resonate have just so much more attention put on them. And so therefore I think that, the trend is moving in that direction. Now, I don't necessarily think that is a good thing or a bad thing, but I just think it's a language thing and an understanding piece that as marketers we need to get much, much better at.
Which is a great segue into what you're up to now. You've moved over to Tenet. What drew you in? Why are you there? What are you hoping to achieve? What's the play?
So I joined Tenet a month ago, having had a little bit of time off between KPMG and here. And it is 100-person consulting business, but it's more than just more strategy business. But we've got three parts of the business, and this was the thing that really kind of appealed to me, which is we have our strategy team, and I sit within customer and brand within strategy. We have our M&A team, and then we have a technology team. And I think the thing that's really interesting for me is that, you know, when you combine those three disciplines, you can actually make, you know, a disproportionate amount of impact for a business, for a client, for whoever. Now, they all operate on slightly different timelines, but if you get the conversations right, it's a really interesting conversation to be having. And then on top of that, if you can apply, having just said that it's all about finance, but if you can apply a kind of layer of creativity in there as well, then you've got a really interesting conversation to be having. So that was the thing that really appealed to me. Slightly ironically, the guys that started this particular team, Justin Paps and Russell Howcroft, are the PwC people that I was talking to. So having said no
Full
to
circle.
them a long time ago, yeah, I'm back working with those guys, which is great. And I've known Russell for a really, really long time. Like I've known Russell for, he says 30 years, I think it was 25, but whatever it is, we've known each other for a long time. So yeah, so it's a bit of full circle. So for me, it was about a team that I thought was really kind of commercially clever and an opportunity in an environment where the big four, whilst they're amazing, were doing less work in the areas that I was interested in operating in: marketing, brand, strategy, creativity.
And here you get to do all of that alongside other smart people.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's it.
We all know that the old kind of agency or consulting model of making money solely on execution is dying, and that agencies specifically should be charging more for, you know, better strategic conversations. Why do you think clients still resist paying for upfront strategy? And how can consultancies, agencies, in your view, start charging for the true value of that strategy?
I think it's because creative businesses get off on doing creative things, right? So the model by which agencies get paid has continued to change and or deteriorate depending on which side of the fence you're on. So if you don't have retainers, which means everything is increasingly project-based, that's fine. But then from an agency perspective, if you're running the business, the money is made when you make something, because that's where the most amount of the money sits. So I think that's one of the biggest reasons that agencies have kind of moved more quickly through the strategic process to get to the creative side of it. And why clients won't pay for it is that I think clients go, well, I'm coming to you for this specific reason of making something. And I'm using kind of loose words intentionally. I'm coming with this express purpose of, I want you to make something for me. So let's just get on with making it. If you want to spend time writing a brief, if you want to spend time doing strategy, that's all great. But actually, most organizations have already done a lot of that work. So from their perspective, they'd be looking at it going, well, if you've got a problem with this, that's your problem. We think this bit here is pretty good. So let's get on with it. And so therefore, I think it's hard for agencies to try and put the genie back in the bottle and go, no, we really should get paid for this thinking, and we should get paid for this research, and we should get paid for these things. It's just the way that the market has evolved over time.
So in your role now, when you're thinking about charging for strategic thinking, how do you know where the line is between teasing and showing where an organization or a brand could go without doing all of the work? So not letting the genie out of the bottle.
I mean, it's one of the things that I learned pretty quickly when I joined actually KPMG, right? Consultants don't give away anything. Like there is no, hey, and here's an idea that it might look something like this or whatever, right? So the world of professional services is much more, this is who we are, this is what we believe in, and this is how we work. And here are some examples of other things that we've done. If you like all of those things, then start paying us and we'll help you fix your problem. I'm oversimplifying it, but it was interesting when we at KPMG, in the few odd campaigns that we made, it was people in our building were like, hang on, but why are we doing the work now? Like we haven't won anything. Like, why would we do that? And it's like, well, that's how you win the work. And they're like, then what do we do afterwards? So it's kind of almost like people just couldn't get their head around, why would you give it all away? Because it's, so yeah, it's a very different way of selling. It's a very different type of conversation to have. And it's not right for every client and for every opportunity, but for the people that are working with a professional services firm, it's exactly the way that it works.
I know you're a fan of Scott Galloway, the New York University professor of marketing. I've got a few quotes I'm going to rapid fire at you, and I'd love to hear your immediate thoughts or why they resonate with you, or if they don't. Okay, number 1, expect that a certain amount of failure is out of your control and recognize you may need to endure it or move on.
I love that. I just think it's just so true of the world, right? Like we aim for perfection, but it's so hard to get there. And to the extent that when I worked at Wieden & Kennedy, there was a big mural that was on the wall there and it said, fail harder. And Dan would often say, you're not worth anything to Wieden & Kennedy until you fucked up a couple of times. But I don't think, like we all talk about learning from our mistakes, but it's not okay to fail in most businesses.
Which maybe links to the second one. He says, I tell my students that nothing wonderful, and I'm talking really fantastic, will happen without taking a risk and subjecting yourself to rejection. Serendipity is a function of courage.
I mean, it's less compelling than the first quote. I mean, I like the idea of serendipity, but it's easy to say that if you've already achieved a whole bunch of things. Like it's much harder to give that advice to someone going, oh, don't worry, everything works itself out in the long run.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a little bit. I mean, I totally get it and I agree, but harder to buy into that one probably.
Number 3, my experience in traditional firms is that anything new is seen as innovative and the people assigned to it, like any parent, become irrationally passionate about the project and refuse to acknowledge just how stupid and ugly your little project has become.
Well, I've been involved in both stupid and ugly projects and projects which have been incredibly interesting and amazing. I think that's true. Look, the only way you're going to get an idea up is if you genuinely believe in it, right? So
conviction,
that conviction piece. So if you don't have the conviction to go, this is going to be amazing, it is going to be brilliant, and I genuinely believe it, even if you're shitting yourself, even if you're going, I actually have no clue whether this is going to work or not. But if you don't show up like you think it's going to work, then why would anyone else believe that it's going to work? So yeah, that makes sense.
Great. Okay, last one. Balance is a myth. There are only trade-offs.
I think I've heard him say that a few times. I think he's talking about work-life balance, right? Or perhaps more broadly than that. It's interesting. I mean, we spend a lot of time, particularly in big companies like at KPMG, we spend a lot of time talking about work-life balance. I agree with him that I do think it's a myth. It's like, I do think it's a trade-off, but it's not a very politically correct thing to tell people that you will never have a work-life balance. Instead, you just have to choose when you will and won't do things. Although I did have to, any time I called someone at KPMG after 6 o'clock, you do have to start the call by going, I know it's after hours. Do you have a couple of minutes so I could ask you a question or talk to you about something? And I never got messages on the weekend from anyone.
You've seen marketing from almost every angle of the industry. If you had to make a prediction, what's the one capability senior marketers need to build now to stay relevant over the next decade?
The easy answer would be AI, but I actually think a more relevant answer, I think, is empathy and humanity. Because I feel like, and I say this, talking to my kids about this a fair amount, that we're so obsessed about technology, and technology can do lots of amazing things and AI can do all sorts of brilliant things. But going down that path means that we often forget what makes us human beings. And every single organization will always say, no, but we use AI with the human at the center, which is true. But so I think that therefore, having a good sense of who you are, who the people you work with are, what's bothering them, being kind of way higher on the EQ than the IQ side of things, I think would be really important for marketers, because I think our lives are going to continue to get more complicated and harder over the next however many years. And that's the thing that is a good grounding for people.
Has your definition of success changed over the years? And if so, how?
A little bit. I mean, I think, yeah, actually it has. I mean, there's a point in your career where you go, I want to make some money and I want to be able to buy things and do things. And then I think then you kind of move into that period where you have, in theory, what should be enough money. And then you realize actually there's probably never enough money. So then you go, okay, I need to kind of focus on something else. And I think ultimately the only thing for me now is kind of having a more content life, working hard, definitely, but not necessarily looking for external accolades, but being kind of healthy and happy is probably the most pressing sign of or signal of being successful, I think.
But I know that you've got a couple of teenagers in your household. Do they help you see the world any differently or uncover insights, or do they impact the way that you turn up at work that maybe you wouldn't have found otherwise?
Probably a little bit. So I've got a almost 15-year-old son and a 17 going on 27-year-old daughter. So my daughter's in year 12 and my son is in year 10. They are both very, very different personalities. My son tells me that he wants to work in finance, and he's wanted to work in finance since he was 12 or 13. And my daughter is at the other end of the spectrum in terms of what she wants to do, which is that, she wants to make the world a better place. She wants to study environmental science, maybe public policy, stuff like that. She's very anti-capitalist, but she has a point of view on the world, and she will let you know what is right and wrong with the world. And obviously there's all sorts of conversations about nurture and nature and kind of, and I find it fascinating that these two people, who my wife and I spend a lot of time with, could be so different from each other, but they still get on like a house on fire when they're together. So the thing that made me think about the thing that I've learned is, first of all, my son coming home from school in year 8 going, all my friends are shorting stocks, I want to do that as well, made me kind of spend more time thinking a little bit about what exactly young people are kind of being exposed to and that side of things. And actually, that in turn then made me kind of go, well, what are the right types of conversations to be having with kids at a youngish age about money and capitalism and all that kind of stuff? And then conversely, at the other end, my daughter, I'm not sure whether she's optimistic about the future or she's pessimistic about it, but I do think that she'll make a massive impact in the world in some way, shape or form. And I think for me, you often forget when you get caught up in your day-to-day, hang on, is this actually going to make any difference? Or should I actually care about this? Or is there any point worrying about these things? And I think if she's worrying about those things, then I probably need to worry about some of those things as well.
You mentioned quite a few times around having a point of view and having a perspective. What's your ethos, or how do you get there yourself? There's, blue or red, or there's, two decisions in front of you. How do you think about which way to go or which sits best with you?
Well, I get kind of mildly obsessive about topics, which then in turn kind of guides my point of view on things. So I'm really into kind of quantifying all sorts of data and kind of understanding, impact on all sorts of different things from a health perspective and just in life in general. So time spent doing this equals, if you do X here, what does that look like? So not that I'm massively data driven, but I always like to kind of know that if I'm going to get into an argument or make a decision that I've done the thinking about, okay, is this the right thing or the wrong thing to do? And I think people that know me that would be listening to this will be like, well, that's bullshit because you're incredibly impulsive and you just go, fuck it, we're just going to do it anyway because I think it's a good idea. And so somewhere, the way that I make my decisions is probably work out what I think is right and wrong, and then just have all that information stored up and then make decisions. That then gives me the ability, I think, to make decisions a little bit more spontaneously.
It's interesting. Obviously, the podcast's around having a hunch. And I wonder if having a gut instinct or a hunch will erode over time with the amount of usage of ChatGPT and other platforms where you're putting in every question that comes to mind and you're sort of co-figuring it out versus having potentially a hypothesis or an opinion before that you're out to prove or disprove through facts. And I wonder over time if we'll see a muscle from young people change generationally based on the usage of AI and perhaps not positively.
I totally agree. I definitely think that that is a way that it will go. You can start to see it now to a certain extent as well. The beginning of that journey, I think, started probably with social media when it started to define what people's tastes were, right? So if you kind of go, I love these things and these are things I'm interested in, I think that's the beginning of how you decide whether you've got a hunch on something or not. And so if social media starts the conversation and then AI kind of finishes the conversation for you and you're not putting yourself out there enough, then I think that definitely I could see that happening. I mean, it's interesting. My kids actively don't use AI my son and I share a ChatGPT account, and it's quite funny because if you ask ChatGPT, tell me everything you know about me, it basically it's like stitch up with our two lives and our two personalities. but the questions that he asks are questions he asks to understand things as opposed to look for answers, which I think is really interesting. And it's a subtle nuance, but I think that's kind of interesting. And at the other end of the spectrum, my daughter doesn't use AI for anything. She studies Latin. She's very clever at maths. She loves Spanish, all this other stuff. And she's like, I don't need to use AI. I'll do it all on my own. Hopefully future people kind of figure that stuff out for themselves too.
Yeah, which makes me think about leaders of the future and maybe honing your skills in, power of conviction and backing yourself, and or as a leader, giving teams time for introspection and, go away and have a think before, hitting up all the technology and tools available that everyone else has access to. If a hunch is made up of so many different inputs that we have through culture and living in the world as humans, maybe great leadership is steering that and, making the most of that in a technology-filled world.
Back in the day, we did it at Droga and we did it at Wyden too, where everyone would get half a day, a month to go away and do something unrelated to work. Go watch a movie, read a book, go for whatever, right? And other, tech companies do some of that kind of stuff as well, where they give people time to go away and think about things and just spend time away from their day-to-day, which I think is really, really important. And I think giving yourself that time, even if it's like 15 minutes a day, I think is important, right? The first thing you do is not jump into work, but actually think about, what am I interested in? What's been challenging me or making me think about stuff? I think that's a really good practice to get into.
So we're 5 years in the future and you're looking back at your time at Tenet, where you are currently. What do you hope that you've achieved?
I hope that we've actually helped a bunch of businesses, clients and individuals kind of grow what they were investing their time and effort into and kind of, achieve what they were looking to achieve. Not because we came up with a clever ad idea, not because we did any one individual thing, but because we're able to kind of combine the skills of the different people that we've got around the table. I have a client at the moment that I've been chatting with. He's like, I want to sell my business for $1 billion. I can't talk about the category, but it's not a category that you go, that's $1 billion business. But sitting with him talking about that topic is really inspiring, because all of a sudden you go, wow, that I had no idea that people cared that much about this kind of stuff. And I'd like to be looking back on it in 5 years' time going, yeah, we were there at the beginning of that conversation and here we are now, and you've done all that stuff and it's kind of made a big impact in the world. So I'd like to be measured on the impact that we've made and the positive conversations that we've been able to foster above and beyond anything else.
What do you think is the future of successful agencies? You mentioned the erosion of executional work, and so therefore I infer further upstream in terms of strategic thinking and perhaps quality of external ideas. What do you think the most successful agencies will focus on in coming years?
I think the most successful agencies will do less stuff, but they'll just do a better job of it. I've obviously spent a lot of time talking about KPMG and kind of the big four and consulting and all the rest of it. And they do everything, right? Which is great. But then you've got kind of your McKinseys and your BCGs that just do less stuff and they charge more money for it. And people seek them out and they say no as often as they say yes, which I think is interesting, right? So I think the future of agencies would probably be the similar kind of thing, right? Like if you take a place like Wyden, I was at Wyden before they had a digital department, so ages ago now. And Dan didn't want to have a digital department because he's like, but we're really good at making ads. And they really are great at making ads. Now, sure, their business model will change over time and all the rest of it. But if you know what you're good at doing, I think that the successful agencies will get better at doing those things and really double and triple down on that stuff, which I think is pretty cool.
Incredible. Thank you so much for the conversation. I've loved chatting with you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me.
My biggest takeaway from my chat with Sudeep is that the good guys really can do well in business. I love his humility and his approach to managing teams and how he's restructured his marketing department and some brand teams to look at the bigger picture, to not just benefit him in the short term, but the organisation as a whole.